So welcome everyone. Sorry that your break was a little bit shorter than we'd planned, but well done for getting back in time. The session today is all about shifting power to local communities, and it was talked about a lot this morning. But my frustration with this is I've been in the development sector for almost 15 years, and during that time, people have talked about shifting the power. And listening to Maya and Richard, you would think, if you weren't operating in India, that actually people get it. But the reality is that they are both very enlightened, but the majority of people don't get it. And so I'm really excited to have Hameeda, Nandita, and Ritu here today, and Saleha, who's going to be translating for us, to share what is actually happening on the ground. And to me, this is what makes Dasra so special, is because you can hear from advisors and philanthropists all the time, but you never learn as much as you do giving the voice to the grassroots. And so I was asking before the session about what are the actual statistics for how many organizations are actually getting unrestricted funding. And of the 107 rebuild organizations, 70% have never received any unrestricted funding at all. So all of their funding is for this specific project or that specific project. And I know there's a lot of business leaders in the room. Can you imagine running a business being told we're only going to fund this one product line? By the way, that's only for 1 year, and we won't fund any of the staff costs, and this is the kind of impact we want to see. We would find that completely ridiculous, but that's the reality of how so many of these organizations are operating. So before we begin, I'd love you to start by introducing yourself. Hameeda, would you like to go first?
आदाब सभी को, मेरा नाम हमीदा है और मैं लखनऊ से हूँ, लखनऊ उत्तर प्रदेश इंडिया, और मैं सद्भावना ट्रस्ट नाम की संस्था में पिछले 13 सालों से काम कर रही हूँ, खासकर औरतों और लड़कियों के लीडरशिप को लेकर थ्रू टेक्नोलॉजी। जी, थैंक यू।
Hello. Yeah. I'll try to do justice to all of the amazing things Hameeda is going to speak here today. So Hameeda leads an organization called the Sadbhavana Trust in Uttar Pradesh in India. And her work has, she's a proximate leader. She didn't mention that, but I'd love to call that out. And she is working with young girls and women for, towards empowerment. And they do use technology as one of the drivers and enablers for that. I'm Saleha, and I work with Dasra, and I'm part of the Rebuild India Fund, so I work very closely with amazing leaders like Hameeda and Nandita, and the 107 others that Sonal mentioned. Thank you.
My name is Nandita, and I give leadership to a small organization called the Farrell Foundation, which is based in Delhi. We work largely on addressing issues of gender discrimination and the prevention of gender-based violence, particularly in the world of work, for informal women workers as well as formal workplaces.
I'm Ritu Hinduja-Chhabria. I'm Managing Trustee at Mukul Madav Foundation. In addition to being Managing Trustee of Mukul Madav Foundation, I wear another hat, which is to support the family, my other side of the family, which is the Hinduja Foundation, as well as I help corporates with spending CSR. So the mode of collaborating with CSR funds through Mukul Madav is the third spectrum of the work that I do. And we're based in Pune, Maharashtra.
Thanks, Ritu. So my first question to Hameeda and Nandita is, as operators of small organizations, leaders of these organizations, what does it look like in real life to not have unrestricted long-term funding? What does that mean for the organization? What does that mean for the communities you serve? And I would love to hear sort of actual stories to bring that to life.
तो जब हम फ्लेक्सिबल और लॉन्ग टर्म फंडिंग के बारे में बात करते हैं तो हमारी सबसे पहले जो नज़र है वो कम्युनिटी के अंदर जाता है, और कम्युनिटी और ऐसी कम्युनिटी जो मार्जिनलाइज कम्युनिटी है, तो उनको कैसे क्रिएट किया जाए एज ए लीडर, उसमें बहुत समय लगता है और बहुत ही शिद्दत से काम करना पड़ता है. तो इसके लिए अगर मैं अपना एग्जांपल दूं तो मैं खुद मार्जिनलाइज कम्युनिटी से आती हूं, और जहाँ पर कई तरह की दिक्कतें हैं, मतलब मोबिलिटी की प्रॉब्लम है, एजुकेशन नहीं है, और एक घर में कमाने वाला एक है, घर में खाने वाले 10 हैं, तो उस तरह से आपकी नज़र एजुकेशन पे नहीं बल्कि आपके रोटी कैसे खिलाना है बच्चों को उस पे जाती है। तो इन सब चीज़ों के बीच में ये तो परिवार की बात है, लेकिन इसके साथ साथ समुदाय जो है वो उसका एक प्रेशर, उसका जो पूरा रिचुअल्स चीज़ें हैं उसको अडॉप्ट करना, उसको समझना, वो सारी चीज़ें मेरे साथ रही है। तो मैंने अपनी ज़िंदगी को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए, क्योंकि मेरा बहुत इच्छा था पढ़ाई करने में, और तो मैंने माली के खेतों में फूल चुनकर और वो जो पैसा पाती थी उससे मैंने अपनी एजुकेशन की, और धीरे धीरे मैंने पढ़ाई को आगे बढ़ाया। पहले 10वां किया, फिर 12वां किया, और उसके बाद मैंने करने के बाद मुझे समझ आने लग गया कि एक्चुअल में लड़कियां क्या चाहती हैं, उनके क्या सपने हैं, उनके क्या डिज़ायर हैं, और ये जो उनकी चॉइस है ये कौन तय करेगा। तो बहुत लड़ाई लड़ी है, और जब मैं कम्युनिटी के बारे में सोचती हूँ तो सबसे पहले मैं अपने आप को देखती हूँ। मुझे लगता है कि हमारी तरह हज़ारों हमीदा हैं जो लीडर्स की तरह उभर कर आ सकती हैं, लेकिन आज अगर मैं यहाँ आपके बीच एज ए लीडर मौजूद हूँ तो तकरीबन 10 से 12 साल लगा है मुझे। जी।
So Hameeda was sharing about her own personal journey, right? She talks about that when we talk about communities, right, we have to consider multiple factors, right? You have to consider the socioeconomic status, or then also the prevalent other challenges, right, in terms of the communities, the castes, all of those other different barriers that they face. So when livelihoods is a challenge, right, the economic situation is not that great, the primary I think factor becomes about how are we thinking about feeding ourselves and our children, right? And then education is not something that they would, as communities, prioritize. Having said that, there was something within Hameeda that she always knew, right? She didn't know what's going to come out of it, but she's like, I have to study. And to be able to fund her own education, she worked as a flower picker with one of the gardeners, and she continued to earn and support herself, and over a period of time actually even support her family through that, right? And she realized that like her journey, right, for her to come here today, it's taken 10, 12 years in the making. But none of that can happen without the kind of support that we can provide with like flexible, unrestricted funding. I'll pause there.
जी जी, तो इसके साथ मैं बस ये ऐड करना चाहूँगी कि जब हम अब एज ए लीडर खुद को देख रहे हैं तो मुझे समझ में आ रहा है कि कैसे अप टू बॉटम कम्युनिटी से लेकर एक संस्था के अंदर, संस्था से बाहर निकलकर कितनी चीज़ें हम क्रिएट कर सकते हैं। लेकिन थोड़ा ये प्रक्रिया धीरे है, और शायद मुझे 12 साल लगा है। मुझे लगता है कि अगर हमारे पास फ्लेक्सिबल और लॉन्ग टर्म फंडिंग होगी तो शायद इतना वक्त नहीं लगेगा जितना मुझे लगा है, क्योंकि बहुत रिसोर्सेज जाता है, बहुत समय जाता है, और बहुत आपको मेहनत करना पड़ता है, क्योंकि वो नज़रिया क्रिएट करना, खुद के बारे में समझना, फिर अपने परिवार के साथ निगोसिएशन पावर क्रिएट करना, और फिर उन चीज़ों को समझते हुए समुदाय के लिए एक रोल मॉडल बनना, वो बहुत सतत प्रक्रिया है, यानी बहुत गहरी और ठोस प्रक्रिया है, और जो मुझे लगता है कि फ्लेक्सिबल फंडिंग अगर है तो संभव है। जी, थैंक यू।
So she was talking about the fact that, you know, all of this takes time, right? And unfortunately, it's taken her 10, 12 years. Hopefully, that's not the case for the other Hameedas in the community, right? There are thousands of women who could benefit with the kind of support and grooming that they need, because she's like, the first step is self-discovery, right? That developing the confidence yourself. Then it's about negotiating with family. And then comes the third step of then, like, I guess, acceptance within the community. So I think going first is the self journey that they look at, then comes the organizational journey, right? So she's talking about all of the different facets that they need to factor in when they're developing leaders from within the community, and that is possible with long-term, flexible, unrestricted funding.
And it makes you realize as well that 12 years, you're talking about 12 years, and we're here talking about funding long-term is like 3 years. You know what I mean? Like, we're just really not getting it, I think, from the funder perspective, is how long it takes for change to happen in the community. Nandita, can I pose the same question to you about what does it look like to not have unrestricted long-term funding from your perspective?
Thank you. I think, taking up from what you said earlier about how how can you just fund one portion of a program? Our work is with people. When you talk about putting communities at the center, we keep putting women at the center. Impossible to really not look at the intersectionalities that they come with. Their identity, their gender identity, their religious identity, the migration status that they have, all of that. And how do we keep all of that in perspective? How do we look at her as a center? So we work a lot on prevention of gender-based violence, and we know that gender-based violence, it also comes with addressing and challenging gender norms. It is a very challenging task that we have of changing behaviors within institutions, within people, policymakers, people implementing the laws. But if we want to work with, one of our team members is Sarita. And Sarita knows everybody in Dasra as well. Sarita is a domestic worker who always cooked. She migrated with her husband from a small town in Bihar, India, came into the city on her own. Incredibly brave woman, found a job herself, got her husband and the children, found a house, paying rent, the sole earning member of a family. But Sarita today is our colleague. So while she continues doing domestic work, she's also part of our team, and she leads the programs on the ground. So for Sarita to be able to exercise the leadership that Hameeda also was talking about, we need to create an enabling environment. If you want to stop gender-based violence, it's not enough to say, speak about violence. How are you creating that enabling environment for her to speak? So for that, you need organizations like us who are closest to the ground, working closest with people, all of us survivors of gender-based violence ourselves, know how difficult it is to speak about it. How does one address that? By just looking at one little piece of me. So unrestricted funding allows us to strategize, think, and include everybody that is in the life of this woman, her partner, her children, the school of the children, her workplace, employer, the employer's workplace, policies, government. So unrestricted long-term funding allows us to think strategically to bring about long-term social change, because we're talking about people's lives, and people's lives don't end after the project ends at 6 months.
Yeah, that's so powerful, and I think, again, reminds me that often funders don't get it. They don't get that, oh yeah, of course you have to engage with the people who are coming around her, her employer, her children. Of course it would affect them, and that, obviously you know that, and often I think we perhaps don't know that. And Ritu, you have a really unique role because you sit on the funding side, you also know about CSR, and you also run your own programs. So I'd love to know from a philanthropist's perspective, what do you think is holding philanthropists back in actually letting go and giving long-term unrestricted funding, even 3 years of unrestricted funding?
Well, I think there's a lot being said about funding and philanthropists and everything. I think it's changing. There's a lot of change processes happening. There's a lot of thought process between, what used to happen and what is happening. There's a lot of collaborative efforts that are being taken, at least for me over the last 10 years since the CSR policies that have come through. We see not only CSR, but philanthropists coming through. When we put out projects that we have verified and we've brought forward, and we talk about a change, a monumental change that we want to bring into any community or a marginalized community, I think the thought process has shifted. It's shifted to understand that it's not going to be a one-time support, it's going to be a continuous support. And more so in the last 3 years, I think during the pandemic we saw that people did understand that it's not a short term, but it's a long term that we should all be looking at. Of course, the amount of initiatives that we're looking at, not only in India, but pan-world, there's no end to it. So
Can I challenge you and say, I think you sound like you're an enlightened giver and you get it, but the reality is that they're not seeing unrestricted funding and nor any of the other small
no, but
grassroots.
this is what I'm coming to, is that the shift has happened and the shift needs to continue. And I think we need to work with the government, with the local communities. We need to work with those that are within the community that want to make that change. And I think people have become more vocal, and allowing people to speak as the beneficiaries, the end beneficiary is now becoming more vocal, is getting a step forward to say, I would like to tell you what it's all about. So I think it's all about understanding work that needs to be done in a wholesome way. It cannot be I command and I thrust upon you and I say this is how it needs to be done. It has to be worked within the community, from the beneficiaries and from those who are giving back. And of course we need long-term funding, and that is something that we as Mukul Madav as well as Hinduja Foundation look at it as a long-term shift that has happened in the way that we've been doing our work.
Yeah, and I think that's really powerful to see funders influencing other funders, because otherwise the burden goes back onto the NGO, and it's like already they have so much on their heads, and then we're also saying to them, oh, by the way, and can you educate all the funders? And what I've noticed as well is that funders tend to listen to other funders more, because that's the way that power works. And so I know that from us, we learned from other people, like 1,000 Currents, who fund for up to 10 years. And I was like, oh, I never heard of anyone that funded up to 10 years. That's a good idea. Why did we never think of that? But they probably knew that all along.
That is exactly what we have seen, and that's why I'm able to say that, because we've been supporting programs for more than 5 years. And after 5 years, we give them a chance to say whether they want to continue or they want to move away. And we've had a recent initiative that we've been doing since 2019, which is with widows in Osmanabad in Maharashtra. 424 widows that we took on post the suicide of their husbands. We helped them with land acquisition, we helped them with training with their field, farming, etc. In June 2023, when we went back again, the 5th year of giving them the seeds and the know-how and everything, they were very grateful, and they said, could you please take a step? Let us just tell you what we want to do. And what they told us was that they want to step away because they've now paid back 70% of the loans. They've been able to put their children back into education. So the help that we gave them has empowered them. And the way that they want to empower others is that the 385 out of 424 stepped away, but brought in one more. So that was true sisterhood, where they brought in and they said, now can you hold hands with them and take them on? So there is a compassion, a sisterhood that we saw here, and that encourages us to see that the community is working together. They're becoming stronger with themselves. So that gave us the strength to move on and say, okay, let's get on to another year.
Yeah, that's amazing that you're funding for that long, and also that I think that speaks so much to grassroots leaders, doesn't it, that they always think about who else can I support, and they're so brilliant at bringing other community voices in. And you raised a really interesting point about gratitude, is that how grateful we are to these organizations, because like I said in the opening, what is money going to do by itself? But these guys are the ones on the ground that are actually doing the work. And so, our gratitude to you both and to all of your colleagues. My next question is about digging more into this idea of power, that power and privilege are so deeply entrenched in all the systems in which we operate. We see it in India, we see it here in the UK, whether it's government, whether it's police, all the institutions that say you're working with violence against women, and even in the slum communities that you're working with, Hameeda, you're having to deal with that, the power and the privilege that exists. Forget about funders for a second. How do you help and how do you support the women or the communities that you're working with to navigate those systems and try and dismantle that power?
तो जब हम पावर शिफ्ट के बारे में बात करते हैं तो कहीं ना कहीं कई चीज़ें निकल के आती हैं, क्योंकि जैसे मैंने अपना उदाहरण दिया था, लेकिन अभी जब हम कम्युनिटी के अंदर जाते हैं तो कई ऐसे उदाहरण बनते हैं जहाँ पर हम खुली आंखों से देख सकते हैं कि कैसे पावर का ढांचा बदल रहा है, यानी जो सत्ता है उसका ढांचा बदल रहा है। उसका एक एग्जांपल ये है कि जिससे जो सर्वाइवर्स हैं, जो डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस में ज़िंदगी जी हैं, उनका एक कलेक्टिव है हमारा, जिनके साथ हम बहुत काम करते हैं। और वो औरतें अपने मोहल्ले के लिए एक नोडल पॉइंट की तरह उभर के आती हैं कि अगर उनके मोहल्ले में कोई वायलेंस हो रहा है या किसी तरह की और कोई बातें हो रही हैं, या किसी बच्ची को मारा जा रहा है, या किसी बच्ची को पढ़ाई के लिए रोका जा रहा है, या किसी की जबरन शादी कराई जा रही है, तो इन सब मुद्दों पे वो कलेक्टिव होती हैं, कलेक्टिव होके आवाज़ उठाती हैं। तो मुझे लगता है वो एक तरह का पावर शिफ्ट दिखता है कि सत्ता एक के पास नहीं है, बल्कि कम्युनिटी भी उसके लिए मौका, अगर उसके पास है तो वो भी उस मौके का फ़ायदा उठा रही है। तो वो एक चीज़। दूसरा मुझे लगता है कि जी
Okay, so I think Hameeda was sharing about like it's so important, right? Like to see the power shifting within the community, and because of some of the work they've been doing and other organizations within the grassroots communities, they're seeing that there is a slow change in this power structure, right? What has happened is women who are survivors themselves have been able to collectivize, right? And then they're coming in together and forming these kind of units that they support each other. Some of them act as like nodal points within the community. So if they see instances of forced early marriages or girls that are being dropped out forcibly from schools, or even domestic violence or abuse of any sort, they're actually able to take charge themselves and collectively go and stop or prevent any of this from happening. So that is the kind of change in power structures that they're seeing from within the community.
जी, और कैसे हम हैंड ओवर करें कि क्योंकि हमें पता है बहुत लंबे समय तक तो आप नहीं किसी चीज़ को आगे ले जा सकते हैं। तो ये भी एक तरह की लीडरशिप तैयार करना कि आज से 4 साल 5 साल बाद वो खुद कैसे अपने कम्युनिटी को लीड कर सकते हैं, एक लीडर की तरह उनको तैयार करना, वो एक चीज़। और दूसरी मैं कहने वाली थी कि आजकल डिजिटल का दुनिया है, और औरतों के लिए हमने ये कोविड-19 में भी देखा कि औरतें बहुत ही महरूम रही हैं, बहुत ही दूर रही हैं, और उनको किस तरीके से देखा गया है। तो हमने डिजिटल लिटरेसी पे काम किया था, और उसका जो मैं इम्पैक्ट देख पा रही हूँ कि औरतें जो हैं वो, उनके पास मोबाइल होता था, लेकिन उनका मोबाइल अमूमन उनके शौहर के पास, उनके बेटे के पास, या उनके बड़े कोई भाई हैं या मामू हैं उनके पास है, लेकिन कभी वो उसका इस्तेमाल सही तरीके से, जैसे घरों में सिलेंडर बुक करना होता था तो मोबाइल है औरत के पास, लेकिन सिलेंडर बुक करने के लिए वो अपने बेटे से कहती थी, पैसा एटीएम से निकालना है तो वो अपने बेटे को साथ लेके जाती है। तो इन सब चीज़ों पे जब हमने काम किया ये कोविड-19 में, तब हमने देखा कि एक शिफ्ट आया कि अब वो औरत लॉक लगा देती है अपने मोबाइल में, और उसके बच्चे कहते हैं अच्छा तुम सद्भावना जाती हो ना, इसलिए बहुत तुम्हारे पर निकल आए हैं, अब तुम्हारा मोबाइल भी हमको नहीं मिलता है। और पैसा जब निकालने के लिए वो साथ जाते थे तो अब वो नहीं लेके जाती हैं, वो कहती हैं मैं खुद जानती हूँ कि कैसे पैसा निकालना है, और उन्होंने अपना एटीएम का पासवर्ड भी चेंज करना सीखा। और जो भी गवर्नमेंट की स्कीम्स है या कुछ भी बदलना है, आधार कार्ड में कुछ चेंज करना है या पैन कार्ड में कुछ तब्दीली करना है, वो सब उनको ऑनलाइन आता है। तो वो शिफ्ट दिख रहा है कि सिर्फ हम ओरली नहीं कह रहे हैं, लेकिन जो ज़िंदगी में मौके दर मौके आ रहे हैं और जो ज़रूरतें आ रही हैं माहौल को देखते हुए, कहीं ना कहीं उसको भी अडॉप्ट कर रही हैं, और वो एक तरह का शिफ्टिंग मुझे दिख रहा है कि कम्युनिटी इसको ले रही है अगर एक बड़ा मौका दिया जाए तो। जी,
Thank you. So she was sharing again some more interesting anecdotes, right? She said definitely like as leaders of organization, at some point they do think about exiting those communities, and that's why it becomes critical to create leaders from within the community, right? And that's why this shifting of power back to the community is so critical to the way they operate. And she was talking about, like, you know, through COVID, one of the things that happened, which was a great thing, was they actually adopted some programs for digital literacy. So earlier women, even if they did have phones, they didn't necessarily use it themselves directly, typically relied on the male family members, right? Or if they needed to visit an ATM, they needed to be accompanied by someone. only because they didn't know how to operate any of these things. But through some of the programs that they've accessed through the Sadbhavana Trust, now they're able to order, do shopping online, order gas cylinders online. They're able to even manage their own ATMs, and that's led to them changing their passwords and putting locks on their phone, and which has led to the men like, just because you head to Sadbhavana now, so you have pulled your, you've got access back to your own things. So just, I think, again, reiterating that this is how you shift the power back and think about moving on. But she, again, emphasize that you need long-term support to be able to do that.
Nandita, would you like to ask the same question?
You know, this question about power, we think about it a lot. And we say, how do you give power to somebody who's already powerful? You know, how do you give power to a community that is already powerful? So we believe very strongly that everybody, every community has the will, ability, and the power to bring change in their lives themselves. Do they have the space for it? So when we say we give power, what do we understand by giving power? It's about giving trust. It's about trust. The wonderful things that were spoken in the first panel as well about trust, about impact, about but what is impact? Who is determining what is impact? You know, so empowerment is really about being able to make the choices, life choices, your life choices, yourself. Are we enabling that? Because when we talk about gender, it rocks the boat. It's easy to give a sewing machine and say, hey, we've done it. But have you enabled her to buy that sewing machine, to invest the money, to go to the bank, to sign off, to withdraw money and control the money and watch a movie with that money, right? Without having to think about my child, my husband, for myself. That is true empowerment, right? So empowering anybody is also giving this. And I also want to talk about, I also wear a couple of hats. I'm also here as part of the Rebuild India Fund. Sonal did make mention of it. Rebuild India Fund is supporting 107 organizations so far, has promised $50 million to support 500 grassroots organizations who are working closest to the ground with unrestricted funds for 5 years to be able to do the work that we just spoke about in the morning as well. The close to the ground, it takes time. It takes time to have patience for it. It's about listening. So I think learning how to listen to what community says. If you see the room on the left of where you had coffee, on the table you'll see a sari. I don't know if any of you saw that bright sari on the table. That sari has been painted by women domestic workers asking about safety in their world of work. They asked their children, the ones which are written there, the children have written their stories for them, but all they did was paint their stories. And with that, the government was able to, the government actually then in a month had all the redressal mechanisms for sexual harassment at workplace in place, just when they unfurled that sari in front of them. So how do you also, everybody has a different way of speaking. So how are we also creating those platforms for people to speak? For us to come here and speak, her in Hindi, for us here, this is shifting power. Right? This is shifting power. So how do you give space for that? And Rebuild India is supporting, giving space, trusts organizations who are working closest to the ground, being led by proximate leaders to be able to do, to bring about the social change that we are all talking about. And only those closest to the ground know how to listen. So I think that's something that we need to also learn, is how do we listen? How do we listen?
Nandita, that's such a powerful point, because often when we listen, we're listening with our lens of understanding. So we're picking up the pieces that fit in our brain, but we're not actually hearing everything that's said, and that's so powerful. And I want you to share this one story which you shared with me, because it was so powerful, and I feel like the audience would really benefit from hearing that, because really, I'm still thinking about it, is from a funding perspective, because I do think the problem is we still won't let go. And it's like, why won't we let go? So will you share the story of the lady with the gold necklace?
Many times when we work with various funding agencies and funders and CSRs, there is a typical image in their mind of who they would like to support, okay? Marginalized, but what does marginalization look like to you? So everybody thinks of someone poor, someone, living on the streets perhaps, but what does it really mean? In our work that we do, and I just told you, domestic workers are incredibly strong, empowered women. They're just not here in the room with us, but they're incredible. So some of the creatives that we created for some of the work that we had done, we'd put gold jewelry, and we were asked, who are these women? So we said, these are domestic workers, but she's wearing gold jewelry. So we said, yes, but if she's poor, she shouldn't own gold jewelry, right? So how do you then talk to somebody who's funding this critical piece of work that we are doing for domestic workers, their dignity, safety, and they don't want domestic workers to wear gold jewelry, but that's who they are. So I think that little shift in perspective is, so when we say listen, this is also important to say what is important for them might not be important for us, but how do we really put ourselves there?
Thanks, Nandita. Ritu, same question to you, please, about how you're working with organizations to dismantle power, or you can talk about it from any of the hats that you wear.
Thank you. Nandita, I absolutely agree with you about listening. What we do when we walk into grassroots communities and we're working with marginalized communities or any community that we work with, whether it's high or low, I think what we lack is the patience to listen. And once we learn to listen, we will understand what's being said between the lines, because we seem to think that we're funding, we're going, we're coming to you, so you better listen to us, and we want to thrust upon them. And we must stop, pause, and not thrust upon them. We must listen to what's happening locally in order to understand globally. And that's very important, because when we are listening to people speaking at any level that we have worked it in, we are seeing that women have a voice which is constantly being sort of pushed away and said, wait, we're speaking on your behalf. Or they don't have their identity because they say that the family is holding the identity. So I think shifting that, the Reformation has started. Women have become very vocal. Women are now standing up for what they think is correct. Women are pushing where it's possible. But having said that, I think men and women together are making that happen. We're seeing this in a school that I run in Ratnagiri, which is again in Maharashtra. It's a rural school. We're bringing urban education to rural spaces. So we have English, we have Sanskrit, and hold your breath, we teach them German. Now, having done this over the last 6 years, one of our students was chosen to go for a 3-week program to Austria and Germany. And no passport, had never traveled out of her own village, had no sense of what clothing to carry, etc. The father absolutely forbid her and said, no, she will not go. And this went on, and we had to get the passport, the visa, etc., all into process. Finally, we had the mother walk into the school, and she said, I've made up my mind. I'm taking the decision. I am not going to listen to my husband because I'm an equal partner. She's my daughter. And that was a huge step taken in that village, a huge step for her to come forward, sign the papers, and get the whole thing rolling. And we had this young girl, 14-year-old, coming back, coming back, giving us the story, done a proper slideshow to show us what exactly she experienced and how she would like to pray for other children to have such an experience. So the shift of that mother showed us the caliber of what's now sort of boiling within the system.
Thanks,
You
Ritu.
want to
Nandita, you wanted to add something?
Okay. I just want to also, talk about some of the language that we tend to use. Beneficiary, for example, right? So you are giving, so someone is benefiting. So basically, you're still more powerful. So really, when you're talking about shifting the power, is also through your language, how you equate that power and make it a level playing field. And there's small shifts in strategies that one can do. Before Rebuild India Fund, there was something called the front line. And thousands and thousands of small grassroots organizations were supported by Dasra during COVID. And one such support we received, and we had never done relief in our life, and we knew, and most of us have done relief here. We know what happens, put them in line, give food, give ration, but we wanted to experiment, and we really wanted that we didn't want anyone to face indignity, humiliation. Remember, these are the women who cook in our homes, look after our children. We didn't want them to feel humiliated, disempowered by just receiving things from us because they could not afford it at that point of time. So how do you run, at the point of crisis, a large-scale relief program and keep that part intact? So we were allowed to experiment, and the database that we have today is a live database that domestic workers have actually created, only database on domestic workers, but they were able to provide relief to 6,000 families for 3 months of domestic workers and their families. And they knew exactly which home had pregnant women, which home had lactating women, which home needed what, which state ate potatoes, which place needed more rice. And each of these rations were tailor-made for each home. And that would have only been possible because, it is only possible because women led that entire relief. So when you trust, coming back to the trust and the power is, we were trusted. And because we were trusted, we trusted. And those women are right back on their feet doing what they do best.
Thanks, Nandita. You bring up a really good point about dignity. And so it's not just about the grassroots organizations knowing what to do, but they really know how to do it. And I think if we can all get into that sense of shared humanity, of understanding that this is an individual just like me, and would I like to be standing somewhere receiving food? So that's a really important point of getting out of that power shift. So I think that we are running a little bit short on time. So I will just ask you both, all three of you, to really quickly give one actionable thing that you would like to see funders or NGO leaders, maybe focus on funders, change about themselves, other than what we've already talked about. So we've already talked about unrestricted funding, and we've already talked about listening to organizations. Yeah, Nandita, would you like to go first?
I think one of the things that we can all do is to pay attention. We talked about listening, but also learning to listen to those who are not speaking. Because especially on the work that we're doing on gender-based violence, we always say zero data is the biggest data that you can get. There is so much silence, no one's speaking about it. So I think that is one thing that I would urge that we do is listen to those who are not speaking, listen to what is not being said.
तो मैं जो चेंज देखना चाहती हूँ, हालांकि शुरुआत एक हुई है, फंडर्स बहुत सारे हमारे नीड्स को समझ रहे हैं एज ए ग्रास रूट लेवल, लेकिन अभी जो बहुत ही ज़रूरी चीज़ है कि हम ग्रास रूट लेवल की जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, जब भी किसी चीज़ के लिए अप्लाई करते हैं, ख़ासकर फंड के लिए, तो उसके प्रोसेस बहुत कठिन होते हैं, क्योंकि एक तो लैंग्वेज का बहुत बड़ा बैरियर होता है, फिर जो उसका फ्रेमवर्क होता है वो बहुत ही अलग अलग तरीके से होता है। तो हम जैसे लोग जो ग्रास रूट पे काम कर रहे हैं, कहीं ना कहीं बीच में फंस जाते हैं, और फिर हमारे पास इतने रिसोर्सेज नहीं होते हैं कि हम अलग से लोगों को हायर करें और चीज़ों को आगे ले जाएं। तो अगर ये चीज़ें थोड़ा सरल कर दी जाएगी तो हम जैसे लोग भी उसके लिए मौका पा पाएंगे। थैंक यू।
Thank you. So Hameeda shared about and her aspiration and her hope is, while she said a lot of funders are moving in a positive direction which is more collaborative, one of the biggest challenges that grassroots nonprofits face is, again, I think the complicated systems and processes that they need to navigate, right? Language is often the biggest barrier for them. So when you have complicated proposal reporting formats, it becomes a huge challenge because, again, with the crunch in the budget, they're not necessarily always able to hire people then to be able to do all of those tasks. So I think it becomes then a vicious cycle. So what she's hoping for is easier, more collaborative ways of working with funders.
I would say the same thing, break all barriers and try and bring in more collaborative efforts at every level, which starts at grassroots, goes all the way up, because at the end of the day, we do need the bureaucrats to also understand what's happening down below. So I think it's about bringing all levels within the system together by breaking the barriers and helping, supporting the way that we move on, march on with the support that philanthropy wants to do, CSR wants to work. I think all of us need to understand that simplicity into the system is much needed.
Thanks, Ritu. So I think we've got time for some 1 or 2 questions. Are there any questions in the room? Will you introduce yourself briefly?
My name is Nidhi, and post my corporate career, I've recently joined the social sector and support a couple of organizations for fundraising and OD consulting, ARPAN being one of them, which works in child sex abuse prevention. I think it's more I'm using this platform to say something. So we've last...
you have to ask a question.
It's a question, okay. So Hameeda had mentioned about making the process easier. And I know a couple of grant-making organizations are giving now their employees or volunteers to NGOs to help in grant-making. So as a question to all the philanthropists and funders in the room, is that something you would like to consider if you're not already doing so?
Ritu, do you want to take that?
With that question, you mean employee engagement programs?
No, giving resources to NGOs who would need some help in difficult grant writing, giving some resources to them to help the process. Some funders are already doing it. Those who are not, I'm requesting, would you consider doing it?
Absolutely. I think we are doing it to some point as well. And I think bringing that quotient is imperative and important, for sure.
And I think that it's a lot of ego of funders. So for CSR, I think it's different because they've got their boards and they've got their ways of doing things. But for family foundations, it's either they just don't know better, because the elephant in the room is that they don't necessarily have time. So they've taken some framework from someone else and they just send it out to everyone and they don't realize, wow, this is really complicated. Or they don't even think, why did I even ask that question? I'm asking all these questions, but I don't know why I'm asking the question. And the organisation is like, what answer do they want me to give? So I think that there is, it is slowly happening, but I think it's really important to question funders. And I would encourage grassroots organisations, sorry to put the burden on them, but to say politely, why do you ask these questions? Because we had an organisation say to us, why don't you fill out the first page for us? That information is publicly available, and they're absolutely right. We should be. Why are we asking them their charity commission number when it's on a public database? Fill it out and then send it to them. So, yeah. Do we have time for one more question? There was a question at the back.
Thank you. Just wanted to understand, your...
Will you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Sharon Via, and I work with a boutique consulting firm primarily focused on impact evaluation and monitoring. Just wanted to understand, you all spoke so much about bringing out voices, and there was so much anecdotal evidence of impact. What are y'all, what are plans, or what do you all do to build this evidence and data where, there can be cross-learning between organizations for what works, what doesn't work, where, what are we doing about evidence and creating data?
Nandita, she was asking about what are you doing with your work to build evidence and data. And I know you're doing a huge amount that's grassroots-led, so maybe you could talk about that.
Yes. So one of the ways that that we work is that we share, right? That a lot of platforms and alliances that we have formed, and we share that data. For example, the issue of safety in the world of work, right? In India, we have law which talks about the prevention and the redressal of sexual harassment at workplace. But if we want that to be an issue to be addressed, then everybody needs to talk about it. So the data that we have, like that sari over there, that is data. So what do we recognize as data? Is it numbers? Is it people? So what do we do? So that sari, I brought it here because I wanted to show you that is data, that is a research, that is a finding. And it's just art by women, informal workers. And that has got the government to think about implementing this law. But then how do we also support others to think like this? So therefore, we have worked, like I said, alliances, other organizations. Now we have the Rebuild India Fund, where there are 107 organizations. Each of us are networking, sharing, talking about impact. And because we allow communities to also, and organizations to also decide what is impact and how they would like it to be recorded. So what you would think is an impact would not be an impact for us. So you would want generally that perhaps if you're funding a program on gender-based violence, how many women are reporting the violence, right? For us, perhaps it would be asking a question is huge impact, and sharing this way of thinking with others like we're doing today. So we try and strategize. We're very creative at the grassroots. We get into different forums and we innovate and strategize and collaborate and plan. But yes, this is one of the ways that we do. And all our data, everything is open source. It's open source. It's for everybody to see and learn. How much we want to learn, how much we want to ask, that's another question.
तो जब हम डेटा के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं तो क्योंकि काफ़ी अलग अलग खेमे में काम होता है, तो उसमें जो सक्सेस स्टोरीज़ है उसको कैसे शोकेस किया जाए, कैसे केस स्टडी क्रिएट किया जाए और कैसे इनोवेटिव तरीके से लोगों के बीच में ले जाया जाए, क्योंकि काम बहुत होता है। बस यही है, जब हम ग्रास रूट लेवल की जो संस्थाएं हैं ये काम में थोड़ा कमज़ोर हो जाते हैं, लेकिन फिर भी अभी हम लोगों ने कोशिश शुरू की है कि हमने एक मोहल्ला फिल्मिस्तान शुरू किया है, उसका भी डेटा हम क्रिएट करते हैं। हमने मोहल्ला रेडियो शुरू किया है गर्ल्स के साथ, उसका भी डेटा हमारे पास है। और जो हम जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस पे काम करते हैं उनकी भी सक्सेस स्टोरी भी और अनसक्सेस स्टोरी भी, कि सिर्फ हम ये नहीं दिखा रहे कि सब बढ़िया बढ़िया है, चंगा चंगा है, लेकिन हमारे साथ और भी क्या है, जो चुनौतियां हैं उसकी भी स्टोरीज़, तो वो सब हम कहीं ना कहीं कलेक्ट करने की कोशिश करते हैं। और अपने वेबसाइट पे और जो हमारा सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म है, ये शुरुआत हुई है अभी, क्योंकि हम लोग इसमें बहुत कच्चे थे और अभी शुरू हुआ है ये। जी, थैंक यू।
Thank you. So Hameeda was sharing that while this is not an area of strength, right, like documenting, unfortunately, because they're so, I think, bootstrapped, right, and they're just making sure that the work gets done. So with grassroots organization, the challenge usually becomes that the work is great, but they're unable to put it out there. However, with time, they're trying to get better at it. They're getting innovative. They try to put up case studies, but they've also started local radios and Filmistan equal to like recording movies, right? And they're able to document some of these stories and then put it out there on their website and any other forums and platforms that they get. But again, she was like, it's something that they want to be able to do better because she's always personally shared they do so much work, but they just don't know how to put it out there.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all our panelists, Ritu, Nandita, Saleha, and Hameeda. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks, everyone.